May I invite everyone to be seated, and we'll begin this meeting of the Bicameral Climate Change Task Force. My co-chair, Henry Waxman, is on his way, but I gather that cherry blossom watchers have slowed travel to the Capitol, and so his staff have told me that I can go ahead, and he'll be joining us as soon as he can. I want to recognize and thank my colleague Chris Murphy, who is here as well, senator from Connecticut, and Representative Scott Peters has joined us as well from San Diego. Thank you very much, Scott. Thank you. This is exciting. We have been doing a considerable number of briefings in a variety of areas, some very memorable, like bringing in the firefighters who had been involved in the western wildfires and hearing about the dramatic changes in the fire season and the fire intensity that have happened recently as a result of climate change. But I don't think that there's been a meeting that we've had that potentially is more significant than this one. And the reason that I say that is that I believe we are far closer to a significant piece of climate legislation than most people anticipate. My theory is that the president's regulation of existing power plants, which will be announced in June, is going to be a game changer for the industry, not only in terms of its emissions once the regulation goes into effect, but in terms of its attitude, because it will no longer be free to pollute with carbon. And up against the requirements of the regulation, a carbon fee that is economy-wide may actually begin to look like a pretty sensible deal. And if the big emitters change their point of view, there will be a dramatic shift in point of view in Washington that will follow in the same instant. The second thing is that this gets into politics and beyond the scope of what we can legislate, but I do think that there's going to be a lot of energy around this issue in the coming congressional elections. And when you look at the numbers, the polling about climate denial, it is disastrously bad for the deniers, to the point where even young self-identified Republican voters by a majority identify climate deniers as, I quote, ignorant, out of touch, or crazy, in a check-the-box list of adjectives that they were offered. That's a pretty telling problem, and clearly shows that the denial castle is built on sand and that the sand is eroding fast. The third piece, I think, is that the corporate community, which in massive number has good policies and has good approaches to climate change, I think can be successfully asked to take one further step and make it clearer to the American public where they stand. And if it's clear to the American public that the companies gathered here and other companies, we've been in touch with a great number of them, Coke and Pepsi, UPS and FedEx, GM and Ford, Google and Apple, Walmart. If there's a combined message coming from the regular corporate community, the adults in the room, I think that can swamp the denial message that is coming from a very, very small sector of polluters, but is now dominating the debate and making the corporate world look as if that is its position. I think you put those three things together and you have the type of political paradigm shift that can make it very possible to pass the type of carbon legislation that many non-elected Republicans who don't have to face polluter money in primaries already support, and that many of our colleagues in the Senate already have supported, or at least did until Citizens United squelched the debate on this issue. So I think we're at a time of real promise, And I am very grateful to the corporate leadership who have joined us today, not only for joining us today, but for their participation in BICEP and Ceres and other corporate expressions of concern and solidarity about doing something sensible on climate change. So with that, let me go from house to house for starters, and I'll turn to Representative Peters if he wants to make a quick opening remark before we get underway, then Senator Murphy, then Representative Christensen, who I welcome and came during my remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. I'll just say it's a pleasure to be here today. I'm a freshman representative from San Diego, California. I was involved in a lot of local activities on climate. We used to say we weren't waiting for Congress to solve our problems. I'm glad to hear some optimism from you that we might actually make some progress here, but California's provided a lot of leadership and a great context with AB 32. We have a act called SB 375 that forced local governments to plan for carbon emissions as they grew. And we were involved in a number of philanthropic efforts to try to provide good philanthropic support for local decision-making around climate, where in an area where we would be faced with sea level rise challenges from water supply, which we're seeing already, and more intense wildfires. So I'm interested in the discussion and look forward to working with you.
Thank you. Senator Murphy.
Thank you very much, Sheldon. Thank you for convening us here. This is really exciting to have this turnout here today, and I'm glad to be here with you. I'm really eager to hear from the corporate partners who are here today to talk about what you've done and the opportunity from a business perspective that lies in being on the forefront of tackling the issue of sustainability. I've worked a lot, as frankly Scott has in the House over the last year, on trying to present some new U.S. leadership on the issue of non-carbon dioxide global pollutants, and those are things like HFCs and methane. And when you look at the path forward on those issues, you see enormous opportunity for U.S. companies as we convert away from polluting HFCs to a cleaner source that comes out of things like refrigeration units and air conditioners. It'll be U.S. companies that make that substitute and are able to sell it to the world. As we cut down on the leakage of methane from gas and oil pipelines all across the United States and the world, it'll be U.S. pipeline technology companies that will make those new devices. It'll be U.S. gas and oil companies that will save money when they don't lose as much product as they transmit it through the process. And so there is enormous opportunity for the U.S. business community in taking this leadership role. And I think, as Sheldon said, there is growing interest here in the United States Senate in acting, in part because we've seen the leadership mantle that the people around this table have taken. For instance, we are on the verge, I am on the verge of introducing a rare bipartisan piece of legislation tackling the issue of climate change around a U.S. leadership position on non-carbon dioxide pollutants. And I think the reason that we're in that position to do something in a bipartisan way in the Senate, which is tough to do these days, is in part because of the stories that are going to be told here today. So I'm glad to stand on Sheldon's coattails in his great work on the Bipartisan Climate Task Force. Look forward to the testimony today.
Representative Christensen, and we're joined by my co-chair, Henry Waxman. So after that, a few words, and then we'll get to the witnesses.
Well, thank you very much. I'm delighted that we're having this.
Representative Christensen, go.
I'll be very brief. Thank you to our two co-chairs for convening this, and for the corporations that are here with us. Yesterday, we met with the EU Commissioner for Climate Action. And one of the things that, I guess her main message here in the United States was that this country needs to lead. And I think if we're going to lead, it'll be because our corporate partners will lead us to finally, in Congress, making the decision to take some meaningful action. So I'm just glad to be here, and thank you for joining us.
Henry, my friend.
Oh, thank you very much. I'm glad that we're all here today, and I appreciate the panelists for being with us. We're looking at hearing from forward-thinking businesses that are helping lead on climate change. For those of us who have been working on this issue, Our model legislation in 2009 was based on a product that came from American business. Many people didn't realize that we had support from the electric utilities, the chemical companies, venture capital, manufacturers, consumer goods, real estate, and even some oil companies. Partisanship derailed our efforts in 2009. Our job now is to rebuild a diverse coalition for a renewed effort. There's no debate on the science. The most recent report from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change makes clear that climate change is happening. It's caused by humans and will impact all regions and all countries. Leading companies, such as the ones that are here with us today, accept the scientific reality and are finding ways to reduce carbon pollution and grow their businesses at the same time. I think it's important that we hear from you. We've got to move forward. We can't accept the idea that in the Congress of the United States we're going to put our head in the sand, ignore the science, and refuse to act on, I think, the biggest threat that's facing our world today. So I apologize to all of you because I'm late, but I'm not too late to hear from you and for all of us to learn from your experiences.
I forewarned
Senator.
Letitia Webster that I would start with her and VF Corporation, and I think just go right around, if that's all right. I know that I got a note afterwards saying otherwise, but I'll stick with what I said.
Great.
Go ahead.
Well, thank you so much for having us. This is actually a real treat to be here, so I appreciate the time you're taking to listen to us and absolutely the time you're taking to actually push real climate change legislation and change forward in Congress. So it's very meaningful to us and, most importantly, to our consumers. VF is about a $12 billion corporation. We're based in North Carolina. 2/3 of our business is based on the outdoor lifestyle brands like Timberland, North Face, Nautica, Vans, Reef. Many of them are new millennials, and they care deeply about sustainability. They tell us this day in, day out. We think about sustainability in terms of how do we reduce our risk to shareholder value, how do we reduce costs, and how do we create competitive advantage. And we think actually being sustainable actually is that lens, and it's incredibly important that we move the company in sustainable ways. Reducing our carbon footprint is probably the most important way of doing that. When we survey our consumers and our customers, climate change is the top topic and top concern for those consumers. One thing that we talk a lot about is the major impacts that we're seeing with our business, and I'll just speak to a couple of them. One is actually around our supply chain. We're one of the largest procurers of cotton around the world, and actually one of the largest procurers of North America, U.S.-based cotton. We've seen time and time again the fluctuations that climate change can actually have with cotton, with increased droughts, increased flooding, just very unpredictable weather patterns. That actually costs and changes the cost of cotton. That was really difficult to plan our business against. We've seen major price fluctuations. That actually, at the end of the day, hurts our margins, hurts shareholder value, and that's what gets the attention of our board and our investors. The second big thing is, again, around our brands. We are based on lifestyle brands. We have many of our consumers, our athletes, our employees are out seeing the climate change impacts firsthand. They are on Everest. They see the Khumbu ice fall quickly dissipating. They see their snowfall quickly dissipating. We have people here from Burton and from Aspen as well who are absolutely impacted by shorter skier days. That's less product that we actually sell, and that's, again, raising awareness around our consumers and customers. That is a risk, definitely, to our business. I think at the end of the day, what we're really looking for is predictability. We're also looking for some assurance from government globally as well as nationally and locally that this is an issue, and we're actually going to start putting some caps on some of our carbon, and we actually can then understand what the price is going to be, and we can plan our business appropriately. We also are tasked quite a bit with how do we move from a carbon-intensive energy source to renewable. Renewables right now are difficult. We look at the ROI. It's often 5, 6, 7-year ROI. That doesn't necessarily bode well with our CFO and finance committee. And I think if an even playing field for renewables, opening up a free market, so actually renewables can play, and let the best product, the best innovation, the best technology win. That's what we're all about. And so I think any legislation to promote that, like the MLP, is actually a good thing for VF and our consumers. So thank you. for being here and listening to us. And thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Senator Whitehouse, Congressman.
Thank you for the many hours I've spent doing the
Yes.
the extra parts.
We now have an assembly service, so you can probably work for us and help us on that. So, no, but Senator Whitehouse, Congressman Waxman, task force members, members of Congress, ladies and gentlemen, good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to speak before you today on this first anniversary of the Climate Declaration. My name is Rob Olson. I'm Vice President and Chief Financial Officer for IKEA in the U.S. And IKEA signed the Climate Declaration 1 year ago because we believe it's our responsibility to have a positive impact on people and the planet. And that includes helping to tackle climate change by accelerating the development of the low-carbon economy. From talking to our customers, we know that Americans are increasingly concerned about climate change as they experience events like Hurricane Sandy and the drought in California. They want to reduce the amount of energy they use in their home, and they care about reducing waste as well as using less water. This is why we are committing to make sustainability affordable with a range of products to help our customers save energy and money. And it's why we are becoming the first U.S. home furnishings retailer to sell only LED bulbs and lamps. Think of the impact we can have if all of us just change in a little bit in our daily lives. IKEA also is committed to running our business in a way that makes a positive impact for people and the planet. We have decided to become energy independent, and we will do this by using energy as efficiently as possible and by investing in our own supply of renewable energy. By 2020, our global goal is to generate as much renewable energy as the total energy we consume. To achieve this, we have invested significantly in solar, wind, and geothermal sources. We've installed 550,000 solar panels around the world. Right here in the U.S., we have solar installations on 90% of our IKEA locations in 20 states. I invite you to visit all of our IKEA stores in your home states and districts, and we'd be happy to show you how we're making a positive impact. America is rich in renewable resources. In addition to solar, IKEA also uses geothermal energy in the heating and cooling system at our store in Centennial, Colorado. And we have another geothermal project underway as part of our new Kansas City area store slated to open this fall.
I'm excited about that.
Yes, and we welcome you on grand opening day. Today I'm proud to announce that IKEA is making its first wind farm investment in the United States, in Hoopeston, Illinois. This is the largest single IKEA renewable energy investment to date. Once completed early next year, Hoopeston Wind will have an installed capacity of 98 megawatts. The 49-turbine wind farm will generate the equivalent of 130% of our energy use in the United States and 10% of our energy use around the world. It's certainly a big deal for us and a big step toward reaching a 100% renewable energy goal by 2020. America has great opportunities for renewable energy, and with the investment, IKEA has more committed renewable capacity in the United States than in any other country. IKEA today produces renewable energy that is more than a third of the total energy we use worldwide, and we have committed to invest $2 billion through 2015 to get closer to our 100% goal. We've now committed to own 206 wind turbines worldwide and have wind farm investments in 9 countries: Canada, Denmark, France, Germany, Ireland, Poland, Sweden, the United Kingdom, and now here in the United States. Once all these projects are built, it will bring us to around 2/3 of our total energy use. In addition, our sustainability strategy includes ambitious goals to become more energy and carbon efficient in our business, as well as in our supply chain, and also to inspire and enable millions of people to live a more sustainable life at home. IKEA is proud to be a signatory of the Climate Declaration, an important call to action by businesses to address the imperative of climate change. People want to take action and are looking to business and government to play their parts. Tackling climate change will unlock business innovation and investment, and we should embrace this challenge together. At IKEA, we look forward to working with business partners and elected officials to continue the transition to a low-carbon economy. Together, we can accomplish much more and lead our way into a sustainable future. Thank you for all that you do.
Thank you, Rob.
Thank you.
Kevin Rabinovich from Mars.
Thanks. I think I drew the short straw following Rob and 98 megawatts of new wind capacity. Good morning, Senator Whitehouse, Representative Waxman, distinguished members of the panel, guests, other speakers. Thank you for holding this important briefing. Your leadership on climate change and providing us the opportunity to address this group and share part of the story of Mars Incorporated. We're here today to share our view that science-driven climate action and business can go hand in hand. We're a private, family-owned business with over $33 billion in sales, more than 72,000 associates and operations in 74 countries. Here in the U.S. alone, we operate 38 factories in 19 states and employ 25,000 of those associates. We're led by our 5 principles, and as a privately owned company, we have the benefit of being able to take a generational view, committing to the long term and making choices today that will pay off down the road rather than just this quarter. But through a focus on climate change and greenhouse gas emissions, we're uncovering opportunities that make good business sense today and for the future. As an agriculturally based food business, we ground our decisions in science, whether that's plant science and agronomy for our raw materials or engineering in our factories. We're taking that same approach to thinking about sustainability at large and climate change specifically. We've accepted the scientific consensus that human-driven greenhouse gas emissions are leading to climate impacts. We don't want to be, to quote Senator Whitehouse, ignorant or out of touch. Our understanding of that science is that an emissions reduction of something like 80% by 2050 is needed to avoid the worst consequences of climate change. Those consequences, as you well know, include altered temperatures and rainfall patterns, leading to floods, drought, spreads of pests and diseases, putting populations, communities, and habitats at risk. As a company whose supply chain is based on cocoa, rice, corn, peanuts, and other key agricultural commodities, this has serious implications for the supply of our raw materials, the farmers who produce them, and the surrounding communities all over the world. From our perspective at Mars, that leaves 2 options. Get to work on science-based reduction goals, or get to work planning for the consequences of climate change, or both. We took that challenge to our thinking about the supply chain, starting with our own operations. Realizing those would be easier to tackle than the rest of our supply chain, we started with an even more ambitious target than the science calls for, and have set a goal of 100% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2040, with a milestone of 25% by 2015. This is part of our overall Sustainable Intergeneration program for our operations, which also includes targets on fossil fuel energy, water, and waste. Facing into that challenge caused us to examine our energy use and sources in ways that we never had. And what we discovered there was uncaptured value, business value, in our operations. The first value came from efficiency. Energy isn't a big part of our cost structure, and there were good business projects, either unexecuted or even unidentified, because they hadn't been given priority. There were best practices at individual sites that hadn't been spread across our network. And just as important as the financial returns, the direct financial returns, there was an opportunity to engage the technical experts in our factories in our larger sustainability program, making them even more proud of being Mars associates and helping us attract the next generation of associates. The second source of value comes from being a manufacturing business with factories that operate for decades, like the new $270 million chocolate facility we just opened in Topeka, Kansas. We know those factories will need energy over those decades, and discovered that by giving up a small amount of flexibility on future energy sourcing by considering long-term contracts, we could attract renewable energy developers to create projects that both green our energy supply and save us money. In summary, we've used the challenge of climate change and the science behind it to help us identify financially viable business actions and strategies we believe others can replicate. More importantly, if other companies and governments don't adopt similar science-based targets, our efforts will have limited effect on climate change. We cannot do it alone. We need the help and assistance of a variety of stakeholders, such as governments, other businesses, farmers, the scientific community, NGOs, and other stakeholders, the list goes on, to play their part in driving for real and science-based targets and solutions. More specifically, considering the limited progress by governments to address this problem in a systematic and meaningful way, Mars has joined with other like-minded global companies through BICEP to make the business case for addressing climate change and calling on governments to undertake meaningful negotiations to reach international consensus in a unified approach. In closing, we look forward to the day when having greenhouse gas reduction targets based on science is no longer a point of differentiation for Mars. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Well, Kansas is the big winner today. I've never really noticed, which is phenomenal. I'm going to talk to you a little bit more, I think, from my heart. in terms of what it means for Sprint and what our evolution has been in understanding sustainability and the business value. And I'm also going to speak a little bit more broadly about corporate responsibility, because that is the scope that I look at. So I am Director of Corporate Responsibility and Sustainability at Sprint. I've been doing this for about 8 years. Sprint has about 40,000 employees. We have about $40 billion a year in revenue, and we're almost exclusively domestic. So very much a U.S. business. We also don't have as clear of a case for why would Sprint be involved in climate change or the sustainability issues. We aren't an agricultural company. We have about $300 million a year in energy expense, but that's less than 2% of my operating expenses. It's not a huge driver for us. So it's been interesting to think about, well, why do we care about sustainability? And I think the beginning was more about reputation. I think we saw where the trend was going, companies were involved in it, it seemed like a really important thing to do. And we saw that reputational lift. We saw a benefit actually in our connections in Washington, D.C. When it was important to the administration, that was a nice connection for us. What really changed for us is when our CEO came in, Dan Hesse, who has a really personal commitment to sustainability. And what he asked us to do when he came in was make those real objectives, make some specific goals that we could work against. So while we can't do 100%, we have a 20% greenhouse gas reduction goal, a 20% absolute energy reduction goal, and a 10% goal on renewable energy. That may not sound like a lot, but keep in mind, we've got about 60,000 cell sites. Can you imagine trying to make all of those solar or wind? It's very difficult to do when you have such distributed, really small facilities. And most of our operations, it's in our network, a lot of capital in our network. But it looks like we're going to fully achieve our greenhouse goal this year, so 3 years early, very close on the energy goal. So we are achieving what we need to achieve. But let me talk about why sustainability is good business for Sprint. So what we really are realizing now is the cost benefit. So if you look at that 20% reduction in energy use, that's about $80 million a year in real cost. If you look at our phone recycling program, another one of our top priorities in sustainability, we actually save about $1 billion a year in cost avoidance in that. Paper reduction, we've saved about $20 million a year. So when you start having those kind of numbers, it really connects and the company understands the financial value of sustainability. And that is important. I'm from a fairly conservative area of the country, a conservative state. This is what really plays, if you will, in the C-suite. Now we're starting a new paradigm, and we're really looking at value creation. So once you've achieved some of the reputation benefits, some of the cost reduction benefits, you begin to see that there's much more opportunity. So what we're really going for is that this shared value concept. How do we start innovating through sustainability, innovating with corporate responsibility, and creating value for society and value for our company? They fit together just beautifully. So I wish I had a whiteboard and a chart, but lately, this has been my big message. We met with our C-suite on Tuesday, and we really talked, and we gave them 6 examples of how we're going to help create revenue for the company in the next 3 years. So it's amazing, and I would say the whole company now has a solid understanding of the business benefit. So as we look forward to the opportunity you've given us today, we want to help other companies become more sustainable. We want the government to help the companies become more sustainable. We think it will make businesses more profitable, businesses more competitive, and overall a better country. So we are very excited to be participating in this, and we're looking forward to seeing the benefits.
Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Lastly, Colin Dyer.
Thank you, gentlemen and ladies. I'm Colin Dyer, and I'm Chief Executive Officer of Jones Lang LaSalle Incorporated, and thank you very much for this opportunity to speak to the task force. At JLL, we provide a comprehensive range of real estate services and investment management advice to our clients. We serve commercial real estate owners, occupiers, and investors with more than 50,000 professionals in 75 countries around the world. One of our service areas focuses on sustainability, energy management, and green buildings as they relate to commercial property. We believe that we lead our industry in this field. In 2013, for example, we became the world's top employer of LEED accredited professionals and green associates worldwide. It's clear that commercial real estate does have an enormous impact on environmental sustainability. commercial buildings generate about 40% of the total greenhouse gas emissions in the world's developed countries. So if you want to control greenhouse gases, you can't avoid buildings. We at JLL manage about 3 billion square feet of space globally for our clients. To visualize that, the Pentagon is about 6.7 million square feet, so we're managing 450 pentagons around the world.
Thank you for not using Rhode Island as a unit of measure.
That's perfectly fine. I'll work on that. So that size creates a significant opportunity for us as a business to make a major positive impact on sustainability in our clients' real estate portfolios. Last year, we helped clients reduce their collective greenhouse gas emissions by nearly 12 million metric tons, and in the process, we saved more than $2.5 billion of energy costs for them. As I noted above, the good news is that sound energy management strategies typically give our clients the single greatest opportunity to reduce both emissions and energy costs. This comes with no negative impact on their business operations. Cost savings alone create a compelling benefit of sustainable design, construction, and management. For example, we recently used our smart building management technology in a program to increase the building operating efficiency at Procter & Gamble. P&G earned back its initial investment in the technology in just 3 months and saw average energy cost savings of 10% annually. The program, which is being expanded, also improved building systems reliability, supported the company's broader sustainability programs, and actually increased employee productivity at the same time. So all good wins for the broader business agenda. Green buildings also create jobs. The US Green Building Council estimates that between 2009 and 2013, green construction activities generated nearly 8 million jobs in the US and nearly 400 billion in labor earnings. These are American jobs, and they will not be exported. When we managed the retrofit of New York's Empire State Building, for example, 200 new jobs were created for that project. Employers have also learned that sustainability is top of mind for the knowledge workers that they want to hire and retain. Research indicates that as many as 90% of American workers want to work for a company with strong green credentials. Business interest in sustainable commercial real estate was originally driven by corporate occupiers, such as my colleagues in the room today. In addition to their own desire to be environmentally responsible, they were challenged by employees, customers, and increasingly other stakeholders to become greener. More recently, and very encouragingly, real estate developers and investors have also identified benefits associated with sustainable buildings. In the US, for example, tax incentives can offset upfront development costs by between 30% and 50%. It took only 2 years for the $100 million Empire State Building renovation, to which I referred, to pay for itself. Owners are also anticipating and responding to the imposition of new environmental regulations, which we also welcome. In the US, this is currently limited to a few cities and states. We find that clients with large, geographically diverse portfolios would prefer federal regulation, one set of consistent rules for all of their portfolios. Building owners now find tenants more willing to pay a premium to lease space with sustainable properties. Rents in buildings with Energy Star or LEED certifications are 2 to 3% higher than other buildings, and vacancies are typically much lower. Increased interest in sustainable real estate has also led to the development of green leases, which offer tenants and landlord meaningful and quantitative and qualitative benefits. Both parties in these lease arrangements agree to a few critical commitments that will improve the environmental performance of leased space. Financial incentives ensure that each party benefits from adopting green lease measures. The potential for making commercial real estate more sustainable is immense. While much attention is given to new green buildings, for example, the opportunities are greater in existing properties. The average age of US commercial buildings today is 53 years old. And in Washington, D.C., it's actually older at 70 years. And in a recent study, less than 15% of building sampled were built in the last 10 years. So opportunities abound to improve the greenhouse gas emission performance of older buildings. So I focus these remarks on opportunities which we've identified and acted on for our clients. I'd also like to close by observing how we try to practice what we preach. We've set 3 sustainability goals for JLL through to the end of 2017, reducing our greenhouse gas emissions in our own offices by 10% per employee, reducing our office energy use by 10% per employee, and reducing our occupied space by 8% per employee, all contributing to space use efficiency. Our progress and commitment have been validated by numerous awards and honors, including being named one of the world's most ethical companies for the last 7 years. Sustainable business practice are a key requirement for earning that award. And in 2013, we received the EPA's Energy Star Sustained Excellence Award. But from my perspective, perhaps the most meaningful recognition comes from the fact that in our latest global employee survey, over 75% of our people felt positive about our commitment to sustainability. Ultimately, for ourselves, for our clients, and for our clients, we at JLL believe that sustainability is good for business and simply the right thing to do. Thank you for your attention.
Well, this is a very impressive panel, and I know what you had to tell us is representative of other businesses, some of the major businesses in this country that have joined together with you in your determination to tackle this issue. So often here in Congress, we get the word that it's just too expensive. It's going to be too difficult. And because of that, people say, well, we can't tackle this problem. And they even go to the point of saying there is no problem, we just don't want to acknowledge it. So they look at the costs, they look at the burdens, and they are paralyzed by the enormity of the costs. But what you're telling us is that it's not just looking at the wrong side of it. The other is the enormous business opportunity that is available if we start moving to a more sustainable future and carbon reduction future as well. I was impressed by your statement. You go to start off because it's good for the reputation of the company. Then you realize that it's saving you a lot of money. And then in addition to that, the value of your businesses are increased because of your determination to live with this whole issue and try to deal with it in a very productive way. So I'm very impressed by what you had to tell us. Businesses don't just operate in a community anymore. It's very often around the world. Whichever of you want to tackle this, how do you deal with the events that are taking place in different parts of the world? How climate change is affecting one area, maybe in a negative way, and other areas more positive ways. How do you contemplate your investments and your activities looking at the impact of climate change? Whichever.
Sure. Before I
Lester?
answer that, I wanted to just touch on the cost thing. And I
Yeah.
think one way to think about it is it's too expensive to not take action. I think we haven't told enough of that story, frankly. It looked like FEMA spent over $130 billion over the past 3 years, about $450 per family, just in their state of emergency and disaster relief efforts. That's real cost by not taking action. And it's just going to get worse. And so I think we need to flip it over and say if we start actually investing today, those dollars are productive. They actually can go to new technology. There could be the multiplier effect instead of just having to constantly rebuild and react from these storms and from the impacts of climate change. So I think that's just another part of that
very good
argument
point.
that we're not necessarily always considering. For VF, we operate in about 150 different countries. We source our products in about 40 different countries, not just in Asia, but we source actually in the U.S. We manufacture in the U.S. We actually make TSA uniforms, the customs uniforms. So we're actually embedded quite a bit in the U.S. manufacturing, as well as in Latin America and actually around the world. We actually are very concerned about water scarcity. Textiles are one of the most intensive water industries, not only from growing cotton, but also from the fiber production, synthetics, the dyeing, the finishing of that fiber. We're very concerned that when you start looking at where droughts are happening, where floods are happening, where water risk is, our businesses happen to be located there. Much of our manufacturing is located there. Countries could start looking at water and starting to divide it up. If there is droughts, I don't think textile industry is going to get a large portion of it. It's obviously going to go to food. It's going to go for drinking water in communities. So it is a big issue. I think that's probably one of the biggest things that we're starting to map out, actually, is our supply chain, where we're sourcing our materials, and how is droughts and water scarcity impacting it. And I would also say communities. I would also say that looking at our brands and our consumer base, we've got Nautica, we have Reef, very invested in water communities. They're very invested in communities that are out and about, that are reliant on healthy and productive oceans and water systems, and they're seeing it firsthand. And so how do we help them? How do we help our consumers actually think about this and help prepare them for it? But I think really it's about water and water scarcity.
I'll speak to the investment community, but since we're corporate users of real estate here, there's another perspective, which is the people who build and own real estate. How do they view this problem? I think increasingly in almost all developed countries around the world, so think Western Europe, US, Australia, it is now high on investors' agenda. It wasn't 10 years ago, but it is now clearly on their agenda because they've understood some of the points I made about the economics of sustainable buildings. They simply retain value. They are better occupied, better leased for higher prices. So there's an immediate positive impact for them if they either build sustainable buildings or invest in retrofitting energy-sustaining measures. And the little-known fact is that it's really the traditional and classical technologies, rather than solar panels and wind farms, has actually produced the fastest paybacks. So typically a wind farm is 10 years. Simply putting better insulation in buildings is 2 to 3 years of payback. So there's a very immediate case for 20 to 30% of energy savings from very low effort, better management, and low-level investments in real estate. The developing world is sadly way behind this agenda, sadly because they are actually building currently their built environment. The work that we all did 100, 200 years ago, they are now doing it, but they're not putting a huge amount of attention at this stage into the efficiency of that real estate. They have obviously other priorities. Final point I'd make is that the reality of this is that investors and institutional investors, we manage $50 billion of real estate around the world, and investments we manage as fiduciaries for institutions and sovereign wealth funds and other organizations. They are, when they're making acquisitions of real estate now, they have a checklist of sustainability issues, from the efficiency of buildings, the economic reasons for that I've referred to, but also, is this building on a current floodplain or a future floodplain? And these are quite sobering things when you see those sorts of checklists and the sorts of things that people are now having to consider when they look forward 10 to 15 years. So a few pieces of information from the investor's side of this equation.
I think to look at it from a retail perspective as well, or corporate perspective, there are many small actions you can do to positively impact from the cost side. You alluded to quite a few, Amy, actions that you guys have taken, where back in 2006 we removed plastic bags from our locations. Helps on the cost side, but more importantly helps on the environmental side. So you're able to take action. Removing incandescent bulbs in 2012 from sale. It's not something that's going to impact our cost, but put us ahead of the competition and moving towards where the future will be. Now in 2016, moving to LED as well, 100%, is that opportunity to be ahead of where the trends are going. But from an investment standpoint, and how do you decide or how do you evaluate where to focus on renewable energy? Being a global company, we need to focus on the totality and look around the world to see where can we have an impact. And when we look at these type of investments like the wind farm we just announced, we don't look at it as a 2-year, 3-year, 5-year, 8-year. We look at 25 years to see how are we going to be able to model this for the long term and really stand behind it and benefit our company and be prepared for different changes that will come to the climate over time. So it's really about taking some small actions that you can do immediately, impacting your cost structure, and then looking to the long term and how do you prepare yourself for the future. And companies need to be in the forefront of that and taking the action today to prepare for tomorrow.
So if I could make an effort to stitch your two questions together, in terms of our agricultural raw material supply, one of the things we realize and see now, just as Letitia commented on cotton, is we see crops suffering impacts from climate change. And obviously that flows through to us in the form of price and in some extreme cases even availability at any price of raw materials. And that obviously impacts us, that impacts our consumers. So building on sort of our science-based approach to things, we came to the insight several years ago that a lot of the crops that we rely on are ones that have not gotten the attention from sort of the agricultural science community that things like corn and soy and wheat have. So a few years ago, we sequenced and put into the public domain the genome of cocoa, which has been an incredibly powerful tool to help researchers all over the world develop higher yielding, more drought resistant, more productive plants. And a more productive cocoa tree is good for us. It improves supply. It's good for the farmer because they now have more product to sell. Just recently, we've been part of a group that's done the same for peanuts. So the peanut genome is now also out. And we're also part of something called the African Orphan Crops Consortium, which we helped set up to sequence the genomes of 100 important food crops for Africa that are, less part of sort of the global agribusiness, but are really important to feeding populations. And those are areas where we see there's science that exists that hasn't been applied to some of those areas, and we've found that we can play an important role in helping advance that to benefit our supply chain and the communities that we source from.
I've got a couple easy comments, I guess. Again, I don't have all these same challenges that you have, but I can talk about some, to me, relatively simple things that companies need to do. One relates to the insurance industry. So as I think about our risk management plans, we rely on an insurance agency to help us identify our risks. So if I think about site by site, that's something that you consider your insurance company can help you drive, and your climate impacts need to be considered in your risk management portfolio. So for us, what that means is site hardening. How do we make sure all of our infrastructure for the network is very protected so that when there is some sort of a climate impact, we can survive that and communications can continue? But that's built right into our site management plan for our sites. The other piece really is the supply chain opportunity, and you've given some, incredibly detailed examples. If I go at a much simpler approach, we have a requirement that our suppliers measure and try to manage their greenhouse gas emissions. It's been amazing to me that many of them didn't know how to do that. So we actually wrote a training manual this year. For one, how do you identify what your material impacts are to the environment and to society? And number two, how do you measure your greenhouse gas emissions? And how do you do it without having to hire a consultant to do it? So I call it the CSR for Dummies book. But it's been really useful. And how do you bring them along, help them understand it, and more importantly, how do I inspire them to see the business benefit? Not just do it because I'm asking them to do it. We want them to do it authentically so that they can see the business benefit. So then you can start to make choices. This supplier has more risk than this one. I should go with this one. It's better for me in the long run, and they haven't come along. So that's really how it starts affecting your business.
Thank you very much.
One of the joys of today's conversation is how forward-looking and successful you all are. And I think that you are broadly representative of America's business community in that posture. And it's wonderful that you see the rewards that Kevin talked about. I think you said, when we faced into these goals, what we discovered there was uncaptured value. And I think that's a relatively common experience. And the problem that I have is that the face of the corporate community in our world, here in Washington, is totally at odds with those messages for reasons that escape my comprehension. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce, which is probably the most active lobbying organization for the business and corporate community, is in climate denial mode. They want to hear nothing about it. The Wall Street Journal editorial page, which is often viewed as a voice of America's corporate community, is in outright climate denial mode. And the lobbying power that is brought to bear on Congress on this issue is very, very heavily by the deniers. And so, as I said in my opening comments, I think we are tantalizingly close to being able to get the kind of system-wide carbon fee that provides certainty, that provides a market correction, that provides the best solution, according to economists all the way over from Reagan's economist, Arthur Laffer, to more progressive economists, and including the big Nobel Prize-winning economists Joe Stiglitz and Paul Krugman. So there's an enormous body of work and good economic sense. There's an enormous power in the corporate sector in this direction. What can we do to bring the place where America's corporate sector is to the attention of Washington, where, frankly, a very different point of view is being represented that I think is actually only really being effectively represented in Washington. I doubt that, you can go very many places in the country and find the same corporate climate denial that the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and the Wall Street Journal editorial page represent. They seem to be highly unrepresentative, and yet in our world, it's very constraining. So how can you all help us break that and get this problem solved in a way that I think helps everyone? I know that BICEP and Sirius have been great organizing influences, and I think what you're all doing is terrific. But I think two things haven't happened. One, the corporate message hasn't sunk through. It's a murmur from many voices that are saying the same thing, but because it's not being said together, it doesn't come through clearly. It doesn't have to be said more loudly, I don't think. It doesn't have to be said more stridently or harshly, but I think it helps if it's said together and the message can come out of the murmur. And the second is that it may be time to begin thinking about putting the sustainability pressure and motivation that so much of the corporate community feels into its political activities a bit more. So we're, agreeing we're just not going to support people who aren't reasonable about climate change any longer, and making that position clear so they can see it coming. There are no surprises, but they know that the days of safe denial are over. And I'm so frustrated because we're so close to being able to do this, and the opposition to it has so little credibility, and yet it has this effect because we haven't been able to punch through. And Henry and I being more strident, I don't think helps. It's going to take a new voice coming in to be the adults in the room and to say, enough. Climate change is real. We know it, and you should too. And I'd be interested in your thoughts on those observations on how your world intersects with my political world.
I think you're spot on. I think there's a vocal minority out there that is definitely, I think, frustrated a lot of us. To be honest, I can speak for VF and our brands. We've been doing quite a bit, around sustainability. We also have a lot of renewable energy, LEED Platinum buildings as well, lots of carbon reduction goals, all that kind of stuff. I think, frankly, we've been heads down, actually just getting it done. Mm-hmm. I think when you start looking around, I guess, again, return on investments, whether it's, my time and my team's time or where we're going to invest our capital, we're going to invest our capital in actually making change and getting ahead and actually being competitive instead of trying to deny something that we know it's coming. It's just a matter of when it's coming. So we consider it as no regret actions. in terms of moving forward with sustainability. There's really no downside.
Excuse me, I'm going to
yeah.
have to excuse
Yeah.
myself, because I just got a note, there's a meeting that
Oh.
where they're voting on some telecommunications issues
Oh.
that I have to go to.
Uh-oh.
Well,
Amy, it's your fault.
Sprint wants me there.
Thank you, Henry.
Thank you all.
I guess you hit on something as I was thinking about, where is that points of leverage that you guys need help with and that we can actually think about working with BICEP and Ceres on. And, it's the Chamber of Commerce, which, I think it would be, really interesting to see how we can influence them, and the Wall Street Journal. We need to understand, at least I need to understand what you specifically need. What are those points of communication that's really going to change things? Now, we're meeting with a number of people here today that I think will help, but what is it that you guys really, really need? And I heard two strong things, the Chamber and Wall Street Journal. So maybe that's something we take back to the group and say, how can we, raise our voices up?
And I'd add the two other things that I mentioned. One would be to make the murmur into a message by having some kind of a more consistent public expression of where you all are, and where so many other corporate leaders are. I mean, I'd love to see the CEOs of Coke and Pepsi on the screen saying, we compete like crazy with each other, but one thing we agree on, climate change is real, we know it, and you should too. And done. Public service announcement, go on. Then have UPS and FedEx get up and do that. Then have Ford and GM get up and do that. Then have Google and Apple get up and do that.
And they're all engaged.
They're all
They're all of
engaged.
them.
Everybody's in the right place already. But as I said, all the voices together create a murmur, and they haven't created a message yet. And I think that hasn't punched through to the public, and it hasn't enabled us to leverage off of that. And the second is that, in home states and where you have the ability to, direct your politics,
Okay.
lift this as a measure and say, look, we just can't support people who are denying this stuff any longer.
So I wanted to jump in with just one quick thought on this, though, as a person from a conservative state with a fairly conservative company. So we've tried to change the dialogue a little bit away from the climate issue because there's got so much baggage on it. Instead, just talk about the business benefits. So when we go into an executive meeting, I never say climate change. It's written, we talk about it in our written things, but that's not the business proposition internally. How does this make our business better? And they can relate to that.
Yeah.
And so that's been at least very effective from our approach. I'm not going to force them, if you will, to lose face. I'd rather just say, let me give you a graceful way out by talking about the benefits to business.
Yeah. And I think that fully supports the activities that you are undertaking, which are immensely commendable and, terrific and exactly the right thing, but it doesn't support the next step, which is how do you break through this little ring of denial that a very small subsector of the corporate community has erected around Washington, D.C., very inconsistently with the views and experience of the great majority of the corporate community. So it's that next step that I'm thinking about.
I think the approach is twofold. And it's first to continue with venues like we have here today, coming together as corporations and seeing how we can support and what actions we can learn from each other to move forward. But more importantly, it's just to continue our own actions. And as we move forward and invest in wind farms or solar panels, geothermal, et cetera, continue to do that, and more people will see and learn from what's happening and realize that it's good business.
Yeah.
That sustainability is our business, and we all are responsible for it moving forward in a good way. So the best way we can convince is to continue to act in a strong way.
I also know that the business community puts a strong premium on results. Things that are sort of just done as time wasters that don't produce a result usually aren't very long part of the agenda. And I could see how the business community could look at where we are in Washington and think, well, we can go down there and talk at them till we're blue in the face, but it's hopeless. And therefore, this falls into the we're not going to get a result category. I would like the chance to try to convince you that it's actually way closer than we think. I wouldn't be having this conversation with you if I didn't think that it would make the difference and it would make a sensible carbon bill deliverable in, say, 2015. That's you mentioned that setting goals made a difference. Mine is a carbon bill in 2015. I think it's achievable. Like many important things, it's only achievable with effort, but I can mentally think through the effort steps that will get us there. And like anybody else, I may be wrong, but my sense coming into this is that we are tantalizingly close. And the obstacle that separates us from this is, it's time to pull back the curtain. There really is no wizard. There's just a little group of companies that have put up a lot of nonsense, and it's time to just move right on.
Well, why can't we get that conversation with those CEOs? Every one of those that you mentioned has spoken publicly on this subject. So is that out of reach?
No, I don't think it is out of
Our
reach.
CEO would join in.
I don't think it is out of reach. I think it's within reach, and I think it's the important sort of next step. I think that the three-step path to getting this done is, one, making sure that the existing plant rules change, because that creates a dramatic change on the emitters' side in terms of their attitude and willingness to accept something like this. Right now, they're living in hog heaven of free carbon pollution, and when that ends, a lot of things change. The second is my read that the politics of this is going to be different than folks suspect in the 2014, and there's going to be some real surprises for people, both in terms of the amount and the success of political activity against carbon deniers. And the third would be to marshal the existing power and positions of the corporate leadership community and simply, again, I can't think of a better way to phrase it, have the voice become not just a murmur of everybody saying the right thing, but having people actually say it together and in a way that it pushes into our public consciousness more. And I don't think the message has to change in any respect from what all of your CEOs and you who are CEO are saying and thinking. I just think it needs to be coordinated, put to music. So thank you so much. I am so impressed with what we've heard. It really gives me optimism. I know that it took a leap of faith to, back to Mars's words, to face into those goals before it became apparent that there was uncaptured value. And you guys are just really doing the right thing, and I'm honored to be with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.